Okay, so for this one, again, number 9, we're keeping up with notes here. So number 9, if you're keeping up with your notes there, that is January 22nd. So, okay, so what we're doing is we're going to be graphing x squared. Now, and again, they'll do this either two things. What you do is an equation or a function, and again, it doesn't really matter which way we do this thing. It's still going to be the same thing with like when we're doing the absolute value stuff back here. You know, for these, it was with the absolute value. It didn't matter if it was y equals or f of x equals. It still worked the same way on the graphs on those. Okay, so absolute value was always a V-shaped graph. If we do x squared, it's a U-shaped graph. They call that a parabola. Okay, and then the big difference is with this one. And the movement's still going to be the same, but when you move these things around, it's going to look the same. Now, the big difference is with absolute value for these. We always had the absolute value symbols. For this one, we're going to use parentheses. So if you have a number so when we're seeing these, the biggest difference is that we're not going to have absolute values. We're going to have a number that's going to be in the parentheses. Then you shift the graph left or right. Okay, and just like with absolute value, if we had a number inside the absolute value, we're going to move this thing in the opposite direction. Okay, so for example 1, here's what we're going to do. We're going to graph y equals x squared and y equals x minus 3 squared. And we're going to do this one in blue. Okay, now when we graph this, we're not going to make it like super detailed, and again, we're not going to make you plot like 15,000 points. And I'm just going to have this so you can kind of see what's going on with it. Okay, so if you graph y equals x squared, it's going to be just like absolute value. You would start at 0, 0, and then you would just have kind of a U-shaped graph like this. Okay, and just like with the absolute values that we just got finished doing, and that's kind of why we were doing these, is that just like we were doing this, when you graph these with absolute value, it's going to be the exact same thing. This 3 that's on the inside means you're going to move it 3 spaces, not to the left, but you're going to move it 3 spaces to the right. So that's y equals x squared. If we graph y equals x minus 3 squared, instead of starting at 0, 0, we're going to move it over 1, 2, 3 spaces, and then make it a U-shaped graph. So it looks something like that. Okay, so if you've got a number, so with x squared, they're going to give you, instead of absolute values, if you're doing x squared, they give you parentheses. So if you add a number that's in the parentheses, you shift the graph left or right in the opposite direction. So normally I think minus 3 would go to the left. It's going to be the opposite. We're going to go 3 spaces to the right. Just like when we were doing these, this was absolute value of x plus 1. We moved it one space to the left, and it was a V-shaped graph. And that's really the only difference that you've got to see. If it's absolute value, it's a V-shaped graph. If it's x squared, it's always a U-shaped graph. It's always a parabola. Okay, and then the other part of it is if you add or subtract a number, that is not in the parentheses, you shift the graph up or down. Again, normal direction on that one. So plus will move it up, minus moves it down. Because that one just, we'll say normal direction. The one that's on the inside is always opposite direction. The one that's on the outside is the one that's in normal direction. Okay, now sometimes people get thrown off on this one a little bit because occasionally you'll get a problem. To show you real quick here what it is that, let's say if we graph y equals x squared, and then y equals x squared plus 4. Okay. A lot of times people go, well, there's not a parentheses. Okay, so if there's no parentheses, that means there's no way this plus 4 can be on the inside. So basically, if it's not in the parentheses, there is no parentheses, so it can't be on the inside. So basically, this number has to be on the outside. So for one like this, we graph these. So if we do y equals x squared, again, it's going to start at 0, 0, just like if we do absolute value. It would start at 0, 0, and then we're going to make this thing a U-shaped graph. The big difference, and again, one of the questions on the test or some of the review stuff may be, if these are your two graphs, how do you change these two graphs? Well, this one you're going to move it 4 spaces up, as you go through this one. So if this is the graph we have here, for this graph, we're just going to move 1, 2, 3, 4. So now instead of going through 0, 0, now we're going to move it up 4 spaces, so it's right here, and then we're going to make a U-shaped graph. Oh, I realized I left this off here. If you add subtract, that is supposed to be a number here. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. If you add or subtract a number that's not in parentheses, you shift the graph up or down. Okay, so again, only difference between these graphs and these graphs with absolute value is absolute value is always a V-shaped graph. These graphs are always a U-shaped or a parabola. Okay, so on the back side of it, we're going to flip over and show you these. Now, one thing we're going to do, it talks about the axis of symmetry, or sorry, the vertex on this one. Basically, every time if you just do y equals x squared, this one has a vertex that's at 0, 0. Because that's kind of our starting point. We always, if it's x squared or absolute value of x, you always start at 0, 0. So if they ask you for a vertex, we're going to do that. We're going to leave it at 0, 0. If you move it left or right or whatever, that's going to be the number that would kind of change it here. So if we move this one 3 spaces to the right on this one, this is at x equals 3. So this vertex would be at 3, 0. Okay. Bottom down here again, this one starts off at 0, 0. Because if you don't move it, all the vertex is always at 0, 0. So they talk about x squared again, vertex would be at 0, 0. But this time you're moving it 4 spaces up. And again, up and down is your y numbers. So this vertex would be at 0, 4. So if you change your vertex, basically it comes down to this. The number that's on the inside goes first for your x's. If there's a number on the outside, it goes with the y's. Because again, you're going to move it up and down when you go through that. Okay, now on the back, here's where we're going to practice a little bit. And we're not going to worry about the axis of symmetry. We'll talk about that a little bit later. As long as we've got the vertex, we're okay here. Okay, so for this one, it says we're going to identify the vertex, and we're not going to do the axis of symmetry, then we're going to sketch the graph that's here. The main thing you got to know here is that normally we would start at 0, 0, but this 2 on the inside means we're going to move it 2 spaces to the right, because it's on the inside. So again, instead of starting at 0, 0, move it 2 spaces over, which would put us right here. And you got a U-shaped graph like that. Okay, and that vertex, because we moved it just 2 spaces to the right, your vertex would be at 2, 0. Okay, with 16. X minus 1 squared, again, the minus 1 on the inside means we're going to move it 1 space to the right. 4 on the outside means we're going to move it 4 up. So 1 right, 4 up. Put you right there. Now, and what we'll do next week, we're just kind of getting the basic shape of it this week. Next week, we'll come back in and give it a few more details on the graph. But just for now, we just need to know the basic shape of it. Just need to know it's a U-shaped graph. Okay, and the vertex is really easy if you got it like this, because these 2 numbers are your vertex. It's just the only thing with this one is you need to change the sign from negative to positive. So then your vertex is at 1, 4. And somebody's probably thinking, so these 2 numbers will always be our vertex. Yeah. The only thing you got to be careful of is that first number, because you're going opposite direction. You always have to wind up changing that sign. The second number, it is just like it is there. Okay, we're going to do 17, and we're going to turn you loose on the other 3 that's here. All right, so with 17, x squared plus 3. Again, there is no parentheses, so there's nothing on the inside. This 3 is on the outside, so that should just move it 3 spaces up. So instead of starting at 0, 0, go 3 spaces up, we're going to start right there. And we're going to make a U-shaped graph that goes just like that. Okay, we'll get 19. Oh, that'd be a good one. We'll do 19. We'll show you that one. All right, 19. Is everybody good with 17? So again, moved it 3 spaces up. So vertex would be at 0, 3, because that's that point that's there. 18 and 20, we're good with those. All right, 19. Got a couple of things with it. All right, let's get the stuff we know before the rest of it. We got the 5 on the inside, so that would be 5 to the left. The negative 3 means we're going to move it 3 spaces down. Okay, so that part we can go ahead and do that. Anything that's in front tells us a little bit of something else, but this is always your up and down, left and right. So we're going to go 5 left, and then 1, 2, 3 down. Make sure I got my numbers right. So it's going to be right there. Okay, got a negative in front, right? So which way is the graph got to go then? Got to go down. Okay, now the 2, you may be going, what's up with the 2? The 2 just means, y'all remember we talked about like how you would stretch it out a little bit and kind of do some stuff? Basically, it's the same thing on this one. And with x squared, there's a shortcut we're going to do that, like, to get to the next point. Like up here, technically, we would have gone up one and over one to get the next point that was here, but our graphs were off a little bit. And that's what we'll talk about, some more details on it later. But basically, as long as it's -2, you just need to know this thing is going to go down. That 2 would be a stretch of 2, or a scale factor of 2, or something like that. Graph-wise, no, because we're going to actually dig into the graphs more like next week. We're just kind of showing the main part of the graphs now. Next week we'll dig into the graphs bigger and show you exactly what that means. But now don't worry, just know it's a scale factor, and that negative is your reflection. So, because all we're doing today is we're just making sure you got the basics on it. Next week we're going to come back and dig into it a little bit more and give you a lot more details on it. But now you just need to know that, okay, still just like with absolute value, you got a negative in front, it's going down. That would be like your stretch or your shrinking type thing if you're going to do that one. But, you know, as far as what it does with the graph, we'll dig into the details a lot more. As long as you know the direction, that's all I'm worried about today. We'll get a lot more details on it next week.